Sorry, can you give me a hand? Wait, is it just this? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry about this. Hi everyone. Today we're joined by Maslin, and he's professor of Earth System Sciences at UCL. He's a leading scientist specializing in regional and global climate change. And this is clearly demonstrated by his extensive number of papers he's published in Science and in Nature. He's also the author of How to Save Our Planet, and he is on Albright's corporate social responsibility board. He's also a Royal Society industrial. And how we can keep to 1.5 degree global temperature from the level of government, corporation. So I will now hand it over to Mark.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. So I have to confess, I am a Cambridge man. Did my PhD here back in the dark ages, when we were talking about how long it took the train to actually get to the. So what I want to do today is just give you an idea of climate change, the science behind it, the actual impacts that are going to happen, and then some insights from my book, How to Save Our Planet, about what we can do to actually make a difference. So I love this cartoon because of course we've all suffered under COVID for the last 2 years, and we've all been talking about flattening the curve and making a difference. But for me, what was really interesting is that instead of suppressing the actual discussion about climate change, actually it's become more shrill, it's become more important. Suddenly everybody's realized how important nature is and how damaging it can be. So I love this cartoon, gives you a sort of real insight. I think one of the other things we should really recognize, because lots of us listen to the deniers, we already have right-wing conservative MPs go, it's going to be too expensive to go net zero. We already have Longberg writing in newspapers saying, well, perhaps we should go nuclear, climate change is about that. The science on actually climate change is really old. We have Eunice Sputt, who actually is the person who discovered the greenhouse effect. She was a feminist and an activist and a female scientist in America. But what she did was take 2 test tubes. She filled one with carbon dioxide, one with air, and she had a thermometer in each. She let them out in the sunshine, and she recorded that the one with CO2 warmed up quicker, got to a higher temperature, and then took longer to cool down. Greenhouse effect. Then, 5 years later, John Tyndall at the Royal Institution in London had this incredible kit, still there, and was able to measure the effect using the thermocouple and showed that out of all the greenhouse gases, water vapor is the most important, followed by carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. And he realized that the one thing that was keeping the world nice and healthy was, of course, water vapor. So we have the greenhouse effect all in the 1850s. So what is climate change? The climate change is really quite straightforward. It's simple physics. And I know it sounds a bit like it really is just simple physics. So the sun's energy is mainly in light. It then passes through the atmosphere. About a third of it bounces back straight out into space. A little bit, which is in UV, is absorbed by ozone. That prevents us from getting skin cancer and having long-term DNA damage. The 2/3 that make it through hit the Earth surface. Now just imagine, You're not here, you're not in college, you're on a tropical beach. Just imagine that. You're lying there with your favorite cocktail, and I know yours. Okay, your favorite cocktail, and the sun's hitting you. You feel hot. The reason being is the light has hit your skin, it converts to heat, and you then radiate that heat out of your body. Exactly the same happens to the Earth, it radiates that heat back out. And this is where the magic of the greenhouse gases come in, because they capture some of that heat, they hold on to it, they agitate, and then they release that heat back into the atmosphere and out into space. If you took all the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, the temperature of the Earth would drop by about 35 degrees Celsius. So that would make an English summer, let's be generous, -15, and an English winter about -35. So greenhouse gases, really good for the planet. However, it seems that we have been putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere through the industrial age. We knew this in the 1930s. So this is Guy Calendar. He was an engineer, and he basically had data from 147 stations around the world. He also had data from some measurements of CO2. He was the first to show that there was a strong warming trend from 1880 to 1938, and he postulated that this was due to CO2 due to the burn of coal. We already knew that the planet was warming up in 1938. Of course, this is the curve that all of you know. This is the Keeling curve. As you see, CO2 has gone up every single year since 1958, when Keeling started to measure CO2 at the top of Maslin in Hawaii. I would have loved to have been there when he talked to his PhD supervisor. By the way, this is a good trick for you to remember as students. So I just imagine that one year we want to measure CO2 in the atmosphere. Brilliant. And I'm going to have to go to Hawaii to do it. Really? Why? Well, it's a long way from other pollution sources, and it's a terrible. So again, I can see that actually happening. As you see, it's gone up. Oh, by the way, I'm a geographer, so you see this up and down. That's because of the seasons, and that's purely because there is more land in the northern hemisphere. So in spring, if it ever happens, spring will suddenly bloom, trees, plants, grasses all start to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. That's the down, and then the up is then autumn. Only because there's more land in the north and south that we have that seesaw. The carbon dioxide levels are now at the highest level for about 3 million years. So if we have a look at the ice ages, so this is the last 800,000 years. This was some of the work that I was doing here in the Sciences Department with my PhD, looking at the ice ages. And you see that methane and CO2 have had a particular area of range that they kept. The interesting thing is this is real measurements. So they take air trapped in ice cores, extract it very carefully. It really is just ancient air, so you can measure the percentage of CO2. And what have we done? We have completely blown that out of all proportion. You see that we've increased CO2 by about 48%, and we've increased methane by about 100%. Luckily, methane is labeled in parts per billion, where CO2 is in parts per million. Okay. Is there any evidence that we already have climate change? Because many of you will be scientists or social scientists and you want to see something. You don't just want to rhetoric. So let's have a look. If any of you like skiing or snowboarding or even watching the Winter Olympics, well, Northern Hemisphere snow come out arguably in the 1960s. Sea ice extent. A friend of mine, Roger Hamilton of the BBC, who's just retired as environment correspondent, every summer would go up like a little holiday to the Arctic to go, look, it's melting. Whoa. So yes, since the 1960s, we have had a huge retreat for summer sea ice extent. One that actually worries me the most is the heat content of the upper ocean. Recent ocean covers 70% of the world. If you think about the upper ocean and the heat content in the inertia of water, it's actually cold energy, that's being creeping up. And then you have sea level rise, which has been creeping up at about 3 to 5 millimeters per year. Doesn't sound very much, but when you put it together over decades, suddenly it starts to make a big difference. That first time. And this is what you will see. So this is what you usually see, which is global temperature. As you can see, you'll see the strong warming that, of course, Guy Canada saw. Force here, then you've got the strong warming all the way through. 2016 and 2020 years of record, I had warmed the planet by about 1.2 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial time. But a lot of people look at that part and go, noise, and therefore what a brilliant colleague like Ed Hawkins has done has produced these climate strikes. You start to find them everywhere. And they're really interesting because this is England's temperatures for like 1850 to and it's all over that. If you go on there, you can go to your hometown or your home city, your home country, and you can download the strikes for your so when you give talks or you want to actually illustrate to friends, you can say, well, this is what your hometown looks like. All of it beautifully collated, updated already now, or I think it's only started up maybe 2021. But this has also started on you can have a car. Okay? If you can afford a Tesla, you can definitely afford to buy it. Okay? And things like how those TV programs when they shake that. Okay, I'm going to call the t-shirt. It's not cool to be warm, you know. Leggings, sales, not going to get you those foreign leggings, really. And of course, having been at COP26 in Glasgow, yes, this was the new trend. Okay, so like either wore the beautiful COP26 idea face mask, or of course you have the climate strike. It's also interesting that in the US there are pledge pins, which of course a certain party actually wears to show that they care about climate change and those not. There's something you do. So I'm a scientist. I want to know about the future. Now, as a scientist, I want to have lots of different Earths. I want to torture them. I want to double CO2, I want to half CO2, and I want to play with it. Except we only have one planet. We only have one place. So we can't do that sort of experiment. We're going to do the massive experiment anyway. But how do we get around that? By using a supercomputer, okay, and brilliant models. So what we have, they are netted grids around the Earth, and they have layers that go into the land, into the ocean, the vegetation, and into the atmosphere. They represent feedbacks between vegetation and the atmosphere. They have cloud dynamics, they have the temperature of the atmosphere. And I have to say, the actual physics I understand really well. They really know the film. You know all of the equations. It all is good. And the other thing is, you can't quite see this bit over here. These are the different IPCC reports, just to show you sort of like scale. So here in 1990, it's a very sort of like small resolution of like 1,000 kilometers. By the time we get to 2013, we're down to 100 kilometers. Interesting thing is, back in the 90s, Britain really was part of Europe because there wasn't enough resolution. So yes, oh, if I could only go back. So here we have very good resolution, and that's because of this. Okay, computer power has gone up almost exponentially over those 30 years. Okay, incredible. But guess what? It doesn't really change the science of it. If you go back to 1990, what they said in the first IPCC report, they were right. Okay? Yes, we've got more confidence. Yes, we have more models. We have more group groups around the world, yeah, but they just say the same. If you put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it gets warmer. Oh, right. So, how much warmer? As I said, the science is really, really good. It is, and there's not enough of you in here, but I usually automatically go to you lot is the problem. Why not? I mean, everybody as well. Because, firstly, how many are they going to emit? How much CO2 are they going to emit? What sort of economy are we going to have? We don't know. So what we create with economists, social scientists, all around the world is scenarios, as I call them, future stories. And so we have here the future story where there are no climate policies, and that gets 4 to 5.5 degrees of warming. Now we think this one is now off the table, okay, which is good because that was what was scaring me, say, 10, 15 years ago. The current policies, if they are successful, will keep temperatures to 3.1 to 3.7 degrees. The pledges that were made in Glasgow, if they all happen and they work, then we get to 2.4 to 2.8. And then there's 2 magic pathways, which are pure politics, which is the 2-degree pathway, because it was at Paris in 2015. The leaders of the world said, and I have to say, are any of you French? If not, oh, they were certainly. Okay, I hate, as an Englishman, I hate to say nice things about French, but they were brilliant. I mean, they were so academic. They've basically got 192 countries to sign the Paris Agreement. Incredible. Really, you should study that as a beautiful piece of politics. But what they signed up to was the world leaders said, yes, we will limit global warming to about 2 degrees, and if possible, 1.5 degrees. That was the small island nations, and at least a beautiful politics, but that's the thing. That's enshrined in national law. Okay. So let's have a step to one side. What does this mean for UK climate? Why would people in the UK care about climate change? So this is to give you an idea about the summers. So in about 10 years' time, we're going to have about a 1.3 degree warming. By about the 1880s, we could have something like 3.2 degree warming, which is huge if you consider how warm our climate is. So it means that summers in the UK will be very much like 1976, 2003, which I'm going to talk about more, 2007, and heat wave of 2018. Those will be the new normal. You may wonder why I've given you a picture of Dungeness here. Okay? You might want to look it up. It's because I'm a geographer, so I have to slip in geography. So the only technical desert in the whole of the United Kingdom, actually have one, is in Dungeness. So if you're able to do a puzzle, please, make it really small. So, 2003 is the biggest heat wave that we've had in the Southeast and in Western Europe. And I've used London as an example because it shows you that urban heat island, and it shows you also why very rich people live in Richmond upon Thames. If you do really well here, you make money here, then it's nice and cool. Okay? Whereas if you're in Islington or Hackney or Camden or anywhere like this, you have huge temperatures. The problem with temperatures, and these are nighttime temperatures, is that is what unfortunately does. The old and frail are able to actually address the temperature during the day. They move around, aerate, hydrate, but at night when they're asleep, their body can't cope with the temperature, and therefore they pass away due to other complications. Okay? All the silent killer. Now, 2 years ago, I had to explain what excess depth was. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have to do that now, which is a great shame. So this is the temperature, that's the excess depth, that's the temperature of excess depth. They're estimated that this heat wave causes 70,000 deaths excess in Western Europe. Okay? That's about half the first peak of COVID in just one peak rate. But because it was silent, and it was old people, nobody knew. Actually, no, that's a lie. The French did, and they actually completely changed the whole of their health service to deal with that. And the reason why they had so many deaths is because anybody young leaves Paris in August. There will be old people there, and they will die. Yeah, they did change what they did. So they are those are the two more powerful peaks. And last year, as climatologists, we cannot actually understand 49.5 degrees in Canada. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay, you expect those to be in the middle of the Sahara or in Saudi Arabia. Okay, you do not expect those to be in southern Canada. And 2021 was really interesting because, as a climatologist, what shocked me and many of my colleagues was the number of extreme weather events. We did not think there would be that many at only 1.2 degrees warmer. Floods in China, wildfires in Siberia, wildfires in Canada, in sort of Tibet and places like that. Huge changes. The other interesting thing is they had all of that in Africa as well, but that wasn't reported by the Western media. Okay? So there were huge floods, droughts, locust plagues all across parts of Africa that just weren't reported. So for the UK, summers, if we can stick to a 1.5 degree pathway, the summer of 2018, which was actually warmer than 2003, and that will be a 1 in 4. 2 degree pathway, every other year will be that hot. And if you start to get to the 3 degree pathway, every summer will be as hot as 2018, which was an extreme hot year. Extreme rainfall events, we've seen that with the winter storms that we've just had, but think of the floods in England in 2003. Think of Germany in 2021. The reason being is because winters are becoming warm and wet, where summers are becoming hot and dry, and because what we're finding around the world, because the world is heating up, more water vapor is in the atmosphere, and that water is coming out in stronger, more intense bursts. Flood risks. This is the interesting one. This is the classic storm coming down the North Sea with a return time of 50 years. And at the moment, many areas of Thames, so London is affected by the Thames barrier, but these are going to be more frequent, more common. And the problem is the Environment Agency knows this, but again, has a budget. So they are protecting high worth property. So one of the really interesting things is the floods a few years ago in Gloucestershire. You had Prince Charles wading through farmland. It's determinable. Why do we have floods in the farmland? And only the Environment Agency was sitting there, not able to say anything, because what they had done, they had protected the city, they had protected the villages, protected poor people, and had to divert the water into farmland. Okay? So these are interesting decisions that risk managers have to make. You can't turn around to Charles and go, we flooded the land to look after the poor. They don't. So, yeah. If London ever did flood, this is the consequence. I love this. This picture comes from a documentary, or sorry, docudrama from a few years ago, which ITV did, and you'll never guess what it's called. Flood. I mean, can you imagine if it was on Channel 4? Blood, death, water, and sex. It's much more fun. And I love this because, of course, House of Commons, House of Lords are equally screwed. So that's just my socialist part. This is highly unlikely. Okay? The reason being is the Thames barrier can be retrofitted. The Environment Agency has plans to protect London up to a 4-metre rise in sea. We are predicting a maximum metre of it at the end of the day. Okay? So the Environment Agency never has to do any development. They can plan it based on the science. Okay? Right. But we'll also still get things like the east from the east. The reason being is all of that sea ice north of Norway has melted. So those cold blasts are coming literally from the Arctic, from Siberia, all the way across northern Europe, can crash into the east of Britain. It's really interesting how people's psyche works. So when this happened a couple of years ago, everyone went, oh, such a cold winter. No, it was a warm and very wet winter. We had 2 days of snow and then it all melted. Okay. I also love the fact talking to friends of mine from Canada. They go, what happened? What happened to your country? We had this white fluffy stuff in London and we shut down. Schools couldn't open, the tube trains wouldn't come out of the holes because it was white and fluffy. Whereas they go, yeah, after 2 meters, then we start to panic. So it's about how societies are set up to do this stuff. So we will need to rebuild things like the Thames Barrier. And I'm sorry, this is probably the stupidest place to put a railway. It's beautiful. If you ever go down Cornwall by train, it's beautiful, right next to the sea. Yeah. Okay, so we have to rethink on our infrastructure. So overall, what are the major effects of climate change around the world? So more extreme storms, floods, droughts, heat waves, and wildfires. Okay, but also we're going to have those in places that never experienced them before. So there is no society coping mechanism for that. So for example, a few years ago we had a hurricane in the South Atlantic. The first ever. We've never had hurricanes in the South Atlantic. This may also lead to food and water insecurity. This is one of the things that people harp on about. However, I will remind you that we can't produce enough food for 10 billion people. But there's only 7.9 billion people. But 825 million people go to bed being hungry. So climate change will affect food production, but actually human misery is about food availability and the ability to buy food. May lead to migration and conflict. Conflict, well, that's usually about other excuses. Look at Ukraine. Ukraine is not paid, I'm sorry. It's about, okay? When you look at all the conflicts, it is about power and really not about climate change. However, the UN points out that if you want an excuse, then environmental conditions and climate change could be a good excuse. Okay? Same with migration. We know migration is incredibly complicated and people move for many, many different reasons. Now, I have to admit that when 25% of Bangladesh goes underwater, there will be a large amount of people wanting to move. Except they can't because India has built a double razor wire fence all the way down Bangladesh because they really know they don't have money. Okay? So the UN Paris Agreement absolutely brilliant. Okay? We need to cut emissions to net zero by 2050. Okay? Absolutely brilliant. The interesting thing in Paris was the announcement. The interesting thing about Glasgow was practically how do we do it? It was you've had to buy 6 years, how are we going to do this? And of course, the UN have not pulled any punches. They said we have to completely transform energy generation, industry, infrastructure, and personal behaviours. As not much there. Just absolutely everything. So why are we in this situation and how could we still technically get to 1.5 degrees? So this is historic CO2 emissions that have peaked at about something like 40 billion tons of CO2 equivalent a year. And if we're to get to net zero and to keep to 1.5 degrees, we need to do that. Okay? Which means that we should be halving our global emissions in the next years and then hit net zero as close to 2050 as possible. of all the energy generated in the world now, generated by fossil fuels. Okay? Except there's also something else that as scientists don't tell you, because you wouldn't like us. So, yeah, even if we hit net zero, then we have to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere for the rest of the century to maintain the 1.5. Okay? Oops. Yes. Okay. So could it help us? Yeah, well, we all stop doing it. Stop flying, we stop driving, we stop doing anything. Must have made a difference. Well, I used to say there was a 7% drop in emission. And everybody thought that was really good. Until I said, okay, I'm going to change it back. This is why words sometimes important. Emissions were 93% of the 1990 levels. Which point you go, oh, that's still really high. Yes. The reason being is because most emissions are from energy generation. We didn't stop using energy, we were still heating our houses, using our laptops, you know, all of that. A lot of emissions come from food and agriculture. We're still eating. Yeah, actually, I know that. Okay, you know, yeah, okay, I have lost weight. But then we also then have to think about not just that, but all that goods were still being used. Okay, shipping, flying. Okay. Oh, by the way, do not get me on to the imitation of those flights. Do you realize that they are flying empty planes around the world all the time to maintain their route so people can't see it? Okay. Okay. Oh, and by the way, so all that meant was that 2020 was exactly the same as 2006 in terms of emissions. But COVID really didn't have any players in terms of emissions. So what we need is win-win solutions. We need things that actually deal with all the crises, which are environmental degradation, climate change, global security, and poverty alleviation. Okay. So this is where I came to write the book, How to Save Our Planet. Because I was getting frustrated that people were writing heavy code, you know, sort of like Michael Mann, you know, the book can actually knock you out. You know, even Bill Gates, you know, it's like, write an easier book, sort of like single sentences people could understand. And the really interesting thing is, there is this whole debate about net zero carbon emissions, and we have the right wing now. So the interesting thing is we have a tripartite: governments, corporations, and individuals. Governments are really important because governments incentivize, they actually regulate, they actually tax, they can subsidize, and they can also feed. And this is really important because people don't realize that governments do this all the time, and we don't realize it. So the reason why we were able to produce a vaccine within 12 months of COVID being discovered is because governments have been funding medical research since the 1940s. And they've been putting money in there, blue skies research, some it may work, some doesn't, etc. Taxpayer hasn't known that. The taxpayer knows, well, why are we wasting money here? Because you never know when it's going to be. And governments do this all the time. There's a whole new group of incredible sort of economists, Mariana Mazzucato, Kate Lauer, all basically pointing out that governments are also the driving force with innovation. They basically drive innovation, they actually drive companies to actually innovate. We need companies to actually step up. We need that diamond analysis. Okay? They can change so quickly. They can actually invent stuff and move forward very, very quickly. And then we need individuals. Individuals need to demand change. Fridays of Future, incredible. Okay? Extension Rebellion, fantastic. We need individuals also then to use their wallets to buy goods and services hard-nosed economists, people who really don't want to agree, okay, they say that, of course, if we don't deal with climate change, it will cost us 20% of world GDP in 2050. Now, I can't do the compound interest, but that's going to be by 2050. So that's going to be a huge amount of money. If we do the infrastructure changes now, it costs us about 1% of world. It's really interesting because the Downdrop project also says it could also save the world 46 trillion, which is about half the world's GDP per year. That's because it's win-wins, particularly health, saving people's health makes huge cost savings. So what can governments really do? This is where we need to actually start demanding within our governments to actually understand. Again, support renewable energy, no brainer. It would make all our fuel bills so much cheaper if we were just using renewables in this country and not relying on, Russian gas. Oops, right. Tax fossil fuels and please cut fossil fuel subsidies. So it's estimated $5 trillion per year is spent subsidizing fossil fuels. Here's what we can do with carbon, okay, in terms of health. Support electric cars and public transport, carbon neutral buildings and retrofitting. I mean, this is a major win. The quality of housing in this country is appalling. People are literally living in slums in this country because we do not regulate buildings properly. If we have to do all this natural retrofitting, we can actually improve that. Reforest and rewild. Britain is the least forested country in the whole of Europe. We should cut a lot of trees down. One to actually build ships to fight the French, and then we basically cut the last few ones to actually make sure we have enough wood to make trenches in the First World War. Promote low emissions farming and diet, supporting expanded emission trading schemes around the world. All really sensible remits. And I'll let you into a secret. So this is work that a brilliant PhD student of mine, Lucy Georgeson, and myself did. We then collated all transactional data around the world. We worked out that the green economy was worth $10 trillion. Okay, the green economy is here. Okay, it's because it's so diverse. It's the water bottle you have. It's the renewable electricity we use. Because it isn't really obvious, people don't realise the size of it. In the UK, it's worth about $328 billion, and about 2 million people are already employed in the green economy. And I love this. I'm not sure it's any use, but the wheel diagrams have produced in this PhD were brilliant. Oh look, we can see that China's trading with the US and it's like, great. I'm not sure it's ever going to be any use, but I love it. Companies are key. And I said before, I'm really sorry, we don't have time for the revolution. Yes, I'd like to have a revolution, okay? But we don't have time. We have to actually use capitalism and go back to more social democracy that we have instead of the neoliberalism nightmare. So the Carbon Disclosure Project has shown very clearly that companies that engage with climate risk, engage with their carbon footprint, start to reduce it, make a 67% higher profit than companies that don't. So whenever I talk to companies, I do a lot of social responsibility. I have this conversation and I go, all I'm doing is making sure you realise you can make more profit, okay? And make the world a better place. Isn't that? No one can get really well. Look, I'm an own tell you absolutely. And so Microsoft 2 years ago announced that they're going carbon neutral by 2030. Okay, that sounds quite reasonable, doesn't it? Cambridge, Glasgow, and UCL are 3 universities that have also announced this last year. Except there was a sting in their tail. They also think, well, if we're going to remove all the carbon pollution, including our supply chain and our value chain, that we have emitted since the founding of the company in 1975 by 2050. I'm not even sure how to calculate that, let alone how you actually remove that amount from the answer. But that's their thing. Because they've come to a different conclusion. They decided that Microsoft will be here for the rest of the and therefore, if they're going to be here for the rest of the century making profit, they want a nice stock to be in to make a profit. Yeah, very interesting. Sky have been carbon neutral since 2007. I launched their Green Britain Week, and they want to go carbon negative and make sure that every TV program that they have, they buy, has to be carbon neutral. Even BP has said that they by 2050 will offset all their emissions. Yeah, it's an interesting. And the thing is, I've met the CEO. He truly believes it. He really is. He is adamant that they're an energy company and they will offset. Right. So what can companies do? Again, very simple. Set transparent and meaningful greenhouse gas targets. Okay? Nobody expects companies to get overnight. Switch to 100% renewable energy. Engage employees in company sustainability agenda. Absolutely. People that companies employ. And I say, I want you to listen. You lot are really interesting. Okay? Because you're going out after you finish your degree, you're going out into the world, and you're demanding a different kind of employer. Gone are the days where you just want to walk into a bank and reach that. Interestingly enough, your generation wants to make lots of money, but they also want to do it with an ethical, sustainable company, with a moral heart. And I love the fact that you and your kids have these. Okay? And CEOs are really having to step up, so realizing, even if they don't like the sustainability agenda, they're having to engage in it, otherwise they're not getting the recruits that they need. So, use carbon neutral building, retrofit, offset emissions through reforestation and wilding. Controversial, but we're doing a lot of work to try and actually tighten up the regulations on carbon credits. Link your ambition to your supply chain and value chain. So you actually pass your ethos and your ethics down your supply chain and get them to engage. Oh, I've been signed out. Okay. Now, right. Right, moving swiftly on. Lobby government to support change. This is the deepest frustration I have with the current government. They're conservative. They're supposed to understand business, and they don't. I had this discussion online with Deborah Meaden, a brilliant entrepreneur and one of the Dragon 10. And she asked the question, well, what can the government do? And we had this discussion. It's like, set regulation as strict as you want, enforce it, because people like Deborah will always make a profit. And she's that good. And good business people always make profit. What we can't stand is, oh, we're going to change regulation, oh, you know, and they can't stand the fact that this government doesn't regulate and enforce. So that means that if you're following all the rules, like Deborah does, and you know that somebody down the road isn't, then they can be a profit. Okay, so everyone doesn't understand the company matters. Yeah, and they're supposed to be the ones that support business. Empower entrepreneurs to drive green agenda. Okay, we all the right ideas we have from around the world. And this is what most people want to hear. What can we as individuals do? Okay? The first thing, talk about it to everyone. The thing that I cannot understand is how the greatest threat to humanity is something that you only come to talk and listen to me talking about. You should be down the public to how bad it is. You know, it should be something that's on everybody's mind. And it is. There's a huge issue with climate anxiety that's growing. And why I say talk about it is because I've found so many organizations, so many companies, few people have a conversation over the water cooler or a cup of coffee, you we infect the whole company. So we'll move it like communities. And suddenly the whole company goes green within a year or so. So talking about it is really important. Talk about, is Jesus college doing enough to actually recycle? Is all the energy recyclable energy? Are they even trying to work out how you take a 14th century building and actually make it work? I think. Again, talk about it. Switch to a more plant-based diet. Yay! Okay. And I say more plant-based diet, okay? Because again, we cannot demand everything's vegetarian or vegan. Okay? But what we can do is tell people how much more healthy they would be if they could do a lot more plants. And what I say to people is, I'm a flexitarian. It means I'm a bit of a hypocrite. It means I eat plants as much as possible. Every so often, I sneak out. Maybe once a month, maybe more a day, but that's fine. Okay, we can do that because if we do that, and we have a small amount of high quality meat that is produced in an incredibly sensitive way, we can do that. Okay? But what we can't do is eat all that cheap meat that we're eating now. And the weird thing is, it's one generation. My parents were able to afford meat once a week. So we had a roast on a Sunday lunch. Okay? We would then eat the recycled bits on Monday, Tuesday, and I hated Wednesday. Yeah, you don't want to. Okay? So again, it's just one generation that has got used to cheap processed unhealthy meat. Okay. Switch to renewable energy supply. So in Finland, that is the default. You have to switch away from that. So you can still switch to a non-renewable. Guess what? Most people don't bother. So you have to actually encourage people and actually help them do the right thing. Reduce, reuse, recycle, reduce your consumption. This one, I think we have a golden opportunity with COVID. That sounds awful, but we have a positive. Which is one thing that we all realized with COVID is what mattered. It wasn't how many shoes I had, not how many cars, or how many t-shirts. It was friends and family. It was the ability to hug someone, to actually kiss them. You know, that is what is being human. We are ultra-social creatures. We really need this in contact. Okay? We don't need an extra couple of portions in the back of the yard. It doesn't make us any happier. And I can say that, weirdly enough, because some of yourselves and your parents, are you any happier with your parents if they will have this? I don't know. But again, we need to reassess what makes us happy as humans. Consume with trusted, sustainable brands, and really think about where you're spending money. Walk, cycle as much as possible. Use electric hybrid cars. Fly less. And I'm really sorry for this one because, all of you are too young for this. But you will have to deal with this at some point. When you have a pension, which if you're an academic, you might not actually get, and you have investments, make sure that they do not invest in fossil fuels. At some point, fossil fuels are going to undergo a huge amount of regulation. They're going to get a huge squeeze, and therefore, money. So therefore, move straight away. There's lots of organizations that are buying up one share from a company and then having 50 people turn up with one share each at shareholders meeting. I'm sorry, I think you should divest from fossil fuels. Really interesting pressure groups out there. Vote and protest. One of the most amazing things about Glasgow was the Friday. Friday was Fridays for Future. The young people went on strike. They came out in their masses. Greta was there, of course, but also so were many indigenous young people from around the world who I think are the true heroes of the climate movement. Huge procession through Glasgow. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, how little I knew. Saturday was the general protest. Whole Glasgow came to a stand. And I was literally standing on the corner just watching the waves. wave of people. It's a bit like a Russian military tactic. You know, people just keep coming and coming. There are 80-year-olds with walking sticks that I did not think were going to make it to the end of the march. Okay, there were people with young children, there are unions there, there were all the young people that came out on Friday, they came out again. There were also negotiators for the actual conflict. Brilliant. The protesting is really important. Oh, I forgot. I always try to leave my talks. Oh, look, guess what? That's your Tesla, and you get one. Okay. So, for me, the battle against climate change will be won in this post-pandemic recovery. This is the point where you should be investing in renewables and into people. And again, I think we have to think about the future. This is Paris, you see that's the Eiffel Tower, this incredible green, beautiful future, you know, stuff like, or do you want New York? This is, I feel bad, but I have to actually explain this. This is the original Planet of the Apes film, and that's Charlton Heston banging down onto the sand going, damn it all will be burnt. Okay? Weirdly enough, a lot of my students used to know that from Madagascar. Because, yeah, exactly. So, you know, so like, you can imagine I have to actually jump a generation every time I make jokes. It's quite weird. So, yeah. I also thought I'd quickly sum up because we did a lot of stuff about our class. And so I'm going to try to relate to all of you what happened. Okay? We were there for 13 days. Okay? And the only way I can describe COP26 was like being at the FA Cup final all the time. And just the noise, the stress, the running around, just incredible. I have no idea how we survived those 2 weeks. So the agreement includes strong statements on the 1.5 degree target, okay? Including a call for 45% reduction in emissions by 2030. So that's still in there, still the ambition for 1.5. The term phase down of coal and the removal of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies are in there. Now, the Western press made a lot more phasing down as the out of coal and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies as opposed to all fossil fuel subsidies. Because this was China and India. However, this is the first climate agreement that mentions fossil fuel. Can you imagine that? 30 years. We've always talked about emissions. Yeah. That's right. Okay, fossil fuel. This is brilliant. There's also a request for new measures for COP27 to boost ambition. So in Egypt, this year will be COP27, and this will be African COP. And because the pledges did not get close to less than 1.5 years, there's a call for new ones. This has been really interesting because Paris said that these pledges would be every 5 years. Now, what's interesting is perhaps we could shift into an annual system whereby countries have to repledge every year, which will be really good and really important. Article 6. So Article 6 is a really technical bit, which is really all about the way that countries trade carbon between. Okay, what is a sink, what is the source, how they trade it, how carbon trades. It's agreed. But nobody really knows what's agreed. Okay? I mean, they basically had 5 years, 6 years to negotiate this. They got to an end, they signed it, and they've gone. So complicated, the lawyers are going to have a great fun with it, but we have something. We have an agreement, so we can move ahead. What did they fail to do? They failed to honour the 2,900 billion commitment from the developed world to the least developed countries to help them move away from fossil fuels. The creation of the Glasgow Loss and Damage Facility was blocked on the last Saturday, by the US and EU because they didn't want to be liable. And again, the NDCs don't get anywhere near the 1.5 degree target. But there were some other really interesting things that happened because you have the negotiations, you then have the wider COP, which is basically all the countries and organizations presenting, and then you have all the companies around them. There was agreement on deforestation, coal phase out, and removing coal finance. Because there's a really interesting problem. This is why Mark Carney, previous head of the Bank of England, was trying to get money together. He got a group that covers $128 trillion of investment. That's 1.5 times the world GDP, and got them together because bankers really matter. And then could be the new savings. That's how you explain. The reason being is because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. Okay? Cheaper to build, they're cheaper to actually run, and therefore they make, guess what, people's energy bills down. Except there's a problem. If I'm a developing country, I need to borrow the money from a central bank or a country to build said facility. Except it is cheaper to borrow money for a coal-fired power station, than it is for renewables. Because coal-fired power stations have been around for 70 years, which renewables are around 30 years. So the risk is, of course, net. So we can get to those bankers, which we are, and go, look, you just put more parity and let the markets work it out. Okay. But these are the little things that really, really matter and why countries make funny decisions. There's agreement to cut methane by 30%, and the US and China announced a collaboration in the 20s on climate change. There's no details there, they just announced it. And that is 43% of world emissions. So if those two can sort out emissions, then we're halfway there. Really interesting. Two colleagues of mine were just standing out having a drink outside the Russian pavilion. The Russians didn't know anything about it. So we're drawing case with China and we have agreed to collaborate. The Russians rushed into the back room, and all we could do is hear them arguing in Russian about why the hell did they not know about it. There was supposedly there was something like 30 secret meetings between China and America just to get that long announcement that they were going to collaborate. Okay. Right. So, I really hope I've given you some idea about the science, how settled it is, about the impact both in this country but also beyond. I also hope I won't scare you too much, but the challenge of net zero is huge, and so is the challenge of 1.5 degrees. But, as I say in the book, we have the technology, we have the science, we have all the policies that we need. What we lack is politicians that want to actually have win-win-win scenarios, because there is absolutely no reason in any country we cannot make people healthier, safer, wealthier, maybe even a bit happier because of that. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind when we look to the future. And I'll give you one other point that I mentioned today online when I was part of the climate crisis advisory group, which is, please remember, poverty is a political choice. We have poor people in the UK, not because it is a natural state of the economy. It's because there's a political choice to allow extreme poverty. Same all the way around the world. Poverty is a political decision, it is not some natural outcome of the economics. Okay. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to take any questions, and I love this. This is John Pett. This is before Copenhagen in 2009, which is probably before any of you were born. But I have to say, it was a complete disaster, and it was all Obama's fault. Okay? But I love it. If we do it right, energy independence, we can preserve the rainforest, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean air and water, healthy children, and there's always somebody over sort of Trump. What happens if it's all a big hoax and we create a better world? Thank you very much, guys. Any questions? Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious mainly I thought it was something that we could kind of deliberate in.
Mhm.
Right? And that's just kind of scares me. So how would you how do you see this like linking or mobilizing into science and into participants narratives?
Yeah.
And the future narrative and after blocking people in the risk.
So I think this goes back to lots of things like Brexit, like the rise of the far right, like working class people. I think it's because if you look at neoliberalism and we look at the last 30 years, for the average person, life has not got better. Okay? And actually, you're in the bottom 10% in some of the richest countries in the world, US, UK, and some major countries in Europe, your life is much worse than it was in the 90s. Okay? So I think what the public sometimes feels is, well, why should I vote for the status quo? Okay? It's done nothing for me. These people are saying they can make a better world if I believe their rhetoric. And actually, what I've had with the liberal middle classes typically that in their best, not working for me, I'm going to go for that. Just think of what happened with the Weimar Republic in Germany between the wars. Okay, Germany was being absolutely hammered by reparations from the French, etc. Their economy was tanking. There was no sort of like balancing of sort of exchange rates, and the economy just crashed. So therefore, why would you vote for anybody who sounds reasonable? You wanted someone who's going to save you and save your country. I think that's one of the dialogues that's going. Neoliberalism and this sort of like idea of like lifting everybody out probably hasn't worked. And I think that I've come to the conclusion that what we need to do is have that social justice dealt with first and lift people out of poverty so that they actually have the ability and time to think about the more important things. When I'm sorry, when many people in this country are struggling to have enough food for themselves and their children day to day, how dare we tell us, excuse me, could you just stop? Don't worry, and could you just worry about the state of the planet and about what we're going to do to it? You know, I think that's something we really need to address. I think one of the most upsetting things for me was when I was going to school, and this is an incredible grandmother who's having to look after her grandchildren for very sad reasons. And she admitted that when the government had changed the credit system, she was having to feed the pig babies on toast. And they were like, oh, grandma, I'm eating it tonight. And she goes, no, I'll speak later. Because she had no food. Okay? That shouldn't happen in this way. But it does. So I think we have to think about much bigger issues before we can then say, how do we move on? And the rise of the right is always when there are transitions, when there is angst, when there are problems. And I have to say, we really haven't dealt with our social issues in some of our major countries. Does that help? Other questions?
Do you interact with they seek out any consultation about this, or are they just
I have to say, this government, no. What's interesting is that lots of us feed into civil service. So it was really interesting that before Glasgow, a lot of us were advising the actual committee about how to deal with climate change and how to actually deal with conflict. What's also really interesting about this country is we have the Climate Change Act, which came in 2008 under Tony Blair, and actually only 5 MPs voted against it, because that's when David Cameron was going to be green. So they were voting for it. And what that does is it sets up a law, and that law says that the UK has to be net zero by 2050. Okay? We have a committee, a climate change committee of the great and the good, from both science side, economy side, social science side, and also medics, all there, who basically set 5-year targets, which the government has to take on. We have a really interesting system whereby we have experts, but most people don't know about telling the government what to do. However, they haven't worked out whether they could ever get a mandate to actually work down the freedom. Therefore, it's so individually, did we actually interact with the Conservative personnel? I wasn't allowed to go to any of those garden parties, most of them. I would have liked to be. But through other routes, there are some very interesting things. Stage, very interesting. A lot of my colleagues at UCL were on stage. There's also a couple of colleagues who released on the stage, and they were on the independent stage. So they're telling the government what to do, and they're telling the government from outside what to do. It's really quite interesting, very interesting point. And I'm sure it's a PhD. So, other questions? Yes.
I mean, like you touched a little bit on what you do yourself. Do you think you could provide a little more detail on what you on a day-to-day would maybe do as apart from, of course, these talks?
What do I do on a day-to-day? So I spend a lot of time engaging with the public through different means. I also try to live my life as sustainably as possible, you know, with diet, with sort of like making sure everything's renewable, etc. My biggest problem is flying. I mean, because my biggest problem as an actor is some of my research is looking at early evolution. I sort of had to do that in East Africa when I was allowed to. So the problem that I have is I have a huge carbon footprint just because of my flight. It's also one of those sort of myths, which is we all fly to conferences to fix climate change. Because the climate deniers go, see, you're not real, you're it's like, actually, we can change our system. Actually, that's really unfair. They go, why? I said, look, if you fix the carbon price $100 per ton, then making artificial kerosene from basically water and from sort of like atmospheric CO2 with renewable energy becomes economically viable. And therefore, all my flights would actually be carbon neutral because you'll be using sort of like sucking CO2 out of the air kerosene. And they go, yeah, but that's not true. It's like, it is, you have a fixed price. So you have to be very careful. It's really easy to be people to point fingers at. Anytime I tweet that I'm in a foreign country, there's a couple of American skeptics go, so you're not a real climate expert, why would you fly? I mean, I say lots of my colleagues. I'm trying to organize an event for a lot of colleagues who turn me down. You know, can't work out how to get there by train. There's a big shift. I'm still ambivalent about how. But I also think the most important thing is how you go about your life. And I said this, it was interesting because I was doing a podcast for GCSE air industry. And it was about, the question was, what career should I go into to make a difference? And I turned back and said, any career. And that sounds really strange. So, for example, I was quoted, I did a 14-minute interview with a reporter, and all they did was take one sentence that I said, which was, the accountants will be the saviors of the facts. They took that. It's true, because, again, the accountants are going to be incredibly important. They're the ones going to be running the spreadsheet, which actually look at a company's carbon footprint. You know, I was at a friend's company, and they were pulling their hair up because to actually report on their carbon footprint of $1 billion company. Really difficult, because you have to get every line right. And they're pretty sure that sort of like the accountants that double check won't really mind if they make a mistake, but they can. It's weird. So being an accountant, tick. You know, being in sort of like industry, tick. One woman turned around and she said, I have to leave that. I feel really guilty, but no, you're the perfect place. You're right in the heart of the enemy. So you start influencing them, you start a conversation. And I honestly said, look, do more by changing the dialogue within fine art. And one of my students prepares sustainability for Stella McCartney. You can't make Stella McCartney any more sustainable. You know, it's sort of like that. She's got green coming out everywhere. Whereas, so I think really it's about taking that knowledge of sustainability and climate and applying it to wherever you end up. I think that's so important. And I don't think it should influence your career decisions because you should go where your heart takes you and then do good things within that. Yes. Oh.
Just like another question maybe phrasing it differently. What about the difference of misinformation or suicide out there is the overhyping the kind of correct solution, right? Saying, well, you know what, the scientists will solve it. I like my science because I don't be fully that science. And then that in itself is kind of really interesting. Yeah, misinformation. How do you deal with that one?
Okay. So I call that the Bill Nick cycle. Because if you read his book, basically he goes, we've got to remove all this carbon, and this is where the carbon is, and these 5 things. And then there's one chapter, he goes, elements are important, by the way. I'm just telling you, Americans don't realise how important elements are. And then he says, technology is solid. I mean, that's it. Oh, by the way, I also have a bit of hate on Bill Gates, because of course, what did he do in America? He blocked Americans allowing the patents for vaccines to be shared freely around the world, even though those vaccinations were produced by government money over the last 50 years, because he wanted to protect them. What? Because you think that we're going to give Microsoft IP away just because we're giving vaccines away to save people's lives? So there are some real interesting things, and there's another talk that I give where I point out that 26 billionaires own the same wealth as the bottom 3.9 billion. You wonder why we have a problem here. Back to your question. Technology will be important. Yes. If you can make fusion work, that will make a huge difference. Absolutely. If you can make artificial kerosene cheaper, brilliant. But there has to be fundamental change in that function. So, if everybody in the world consumed at the same rate, not as an American, just rich, then we need about 4 planets. Okay? So we have to actually think that consumption is a major issue. Okay? And therefore we need to start thinking about what makes us happy. Okay? What is a good society? So no, I think that we have to have major rethinking of society. We need major rethinking about how people are part of society. And again, I am a real firm believer in things like universal basic income, universal basic services. I am still deeply frustrated that you lot have to pay to go to university. I didn't. I just had to pay to support myself. I mean, access to education should be free. Yeah? And that really frustrates me because it changes the dynamics between lecturer and student because they think they are now paying customers. And it's like, yeah, you're still only going to get 46%. And it just changes that dynamic. I also think that means that people don't have those opportunities to actually step back into education and everything. And I think you need to open up opportunities all the time. And I think that's what we've done. We've stilted social mobility. And I think what frightens me is the brilliant thing about humanity is we are ultra social. We also have a cumulative culture, which means that we only need one Einstein. We only need one person who can. Okay? Because the rest of us can learn. We go, oh, yes, that's fine. Right? We only need a couple of these geniuses popping up. But what worries me is, what happens if they're in a full family in Estonia? What happens if they're in sort of like a son in New York? What happens if they're in Portsmouth in Liverpool and basically never make it out? We're losing all those opportunities to make the world a better place. I think that's really things like that make me worry overnight, which is we're going to have 10 billion people on this planet by the end of the day. And that will be stabilized, yes, by the way, because because we're in a situation you are taking control very sensibly. And so therefore we need to think as a global species. And I think that's something that my generation can't do. Okay, some of us can, but I get the feeling that you lot think more globally. And weirdly enough, I want to do this. You know you can connect with every single person on the planet if you want, as long as you've got a number. Okay? You know the Maslin are basically doing internet banking to basically supply payment institutions. You know how small the planet is. You also know how fragile. What I'm hoping is that you're a more global species than my generation. I'm full of lots of that. So I have a few drinks and I get bored. So, yeah. Question there, question there.
I was wondering about, massive computers. There's a lot of them. What do you think they are doing?
Okay, so agriculture is a real issue. The reason being is we want to make it more efficient and we want to make it more sustainable. The problem is it also employs a lot of people. So you find that in many countries, what they're trying to do, and India has come across this huge issue, which is they're trying to modernize their agriculture. But the farmers don't trust the government because the way the government's doing it, they feel that big companies are just going to buy up land and it's going to look like the US. Okay? And so there's this tension between looking after people's livelihoods at the same time as trying to help them to be more sustainable and actually grow in the best way they can with guaranteed pricing. So there are some really perverse things going on, and open trade is a nightmare. Okay, so and let's say this out loud, I loathe the world trade. Okay, so for example, after the Second World War in this country, we had guaranteed prices for food. Okay, so we would say to farmers, if you produce milk, you will get a price per gallon. Okay? We didn't have liters in there, per gallon. Okay, it didn't matter if it was from Shetlands or it was from next door. Okay, if you produce milk, we guarantee it. Okay, same with potatoes, etc. And you had the potato board, the milk board, etc. Because we wanted to support farmers. Now, of course, many countries would like to do that. They'd like to protect their food production. So therefore, they are producing food for their own people and a little bit to export. Except big Western countries, you can't do that. That's anti-trade. We want to trade. And we know that the US have basically been in contempt of the World Trade Organization for things like corn, cotton. I mean, African cotton is much cheaper, except the subsidies that the American farmers get so large that their cotton is still cheaper. Total perverse madness. So we have to actually try to unpick. The problem is that's why it's such a wicked problem. We have to unpick all these bits. And again, lots of politicians look at it going, okay, let's just leave it. So you then, I think the one thing you should do is, whenever you come to one of those problems, follow the money and then work out who's actually getting from it. No, I don't have a solution, by the way. I really wish, if I had, I'd be well directed. I don't like the president, but I'm happy with it.
So I was thinking about how in the world, there are a lot of people like 40,000 every day, mostly that is
Yeah.
So I was wondering,
Okay, so there is a huge debate about mitigation so reducing emissions or actually taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, and adaptation. How do you actually adapt society to a changing climate? Many of my colleagues think this is completely artificial. And I have to say, going back in time, there was a huge argument when this person was proposed that actually this you could do. Because there are many things that people do to adapt to make their lives less risky and more resilient, which also reduces emissions. That's mitigation. There's also mitigation, which actually, if you do it in the right way, can actually then help people adapt to dry conditions and things like that. So there is this real merging. The reason why adaptation has never really, until now, had the same banner head is because colleagues of mine, older colleagues of mine, were really worried about allowing politicians to think about adaptation because they wanted them to focus on reducing emissions. And they thought that talking about adaptation was giving in, and therefore they just focused on it. This is also one of my bugbears because the whole environment movement seems to focus on climate change. But guess what? We cut half the trees down from the planet, which are trees. We have sort of like huge issues with deforestation, with problems with zoonotic diseases, jumping from nature, because we have so many environmental issues around plastics in every single ocean, plastics in the blood. So we've got microplastics in the blood. We have all those issues. Not really focus on climate change. That is because, and that's our fault. That really is the scientist's fault because started shouting about it in 1990. They thought people were listening, and we got to the end of the 1990s, and of course, just stopped listening. So they started shouting even more. And so what happened is, there's been such a focus on climate change, I think it's got much more of the impact. The impact of humans on the planet is immense. And this is why I really like the term the anthropocene. That's because he says, human period. We have control of it. Maybe it is quite scary how much we are changing. I don't think people realize that. But I'm really aware that climate change is one of the aspects of it. Yes.
Do you agree with the statement from the man that kind of governments are the most important factor of combating climate change and mitigating climate change?
So, Michael Mann, I love him dearly, likes these bold statements. I call him the bulldog of the climate change. Okay? He will literally grab your leg and roll you together to make sure you understand. I think there's more nuance approach. Government should be by the people, for the people. The government should be representing the people. So in terms of importance, the people are most important. Okay? Because it's what they want, how they want to be healthier, wealthier, safer. Okay? In terms of influence, governments can go a huge way because they can enable. And that's actually really important. So governments can actually just twist the dial, change tax slightly, whole new businesses start. You change subsidies, suddenly whole new areas. So for example, we had a revolution in solar panels in this country because the previous government had a nice dial that meant you made a decent amount of money to do it. And then they went, oh, no. We need to turn it back. I remember that huge Eden project down in Cornwall was going to set up huge solar panels all around, etc. And then the government overnight went, yeah, anything over X gigawatts, we're not fine. And now, weirdly enough, they're actually drilling down into sketching. Okay, you can't stop it. You can't stop the Eden project. But again, that's why governments are really important. And they can lead. That's really important. But actually, if you want things to happen, that's where the corporate world comes in. Okay? So if you can engage with the corporate world, you can start to actually change things really quick. Okay? They think they can make some money, and they think there's a market, they will basically change something for the world to do. Okay? In this is why sometimes mass subsidies work. Because if you suddenly say, give me an example in this country, we need to move from gas central heating to heat pumps. Okay, ground and air heat exchange. If I was the government, I'll go, right, we the government are going to pay for every house that is owned to switch. And we're going to put this out to 10. Just think what the unit price would come down to. Okay? Because suddenly all these companies get the whole of England. Anything? Yes. Now, of course, they're probably going to go robbing more. But again, you will see the scale. You can start to say, so London, interestingly enough, all the boroughs are getting together with the mayor to try and actually say, we will all buy electricity, renewable electricity, one person or one company per year. Do you want to actually do this for London? And then the price comes out to that. Wow. Because of course, if you're only make a small percentage of profit, but you're doing it, you're making a lot of money. Okay, so again, it's thinking big and thinking about scale. So I would take my commands and go, yeah, okay, remember, what's really interesting, you have to remember, a young girl sat outside of Parliament with a homemade placard. You would have walked past her, you would have run to the street. You know, well, you might have. And guess what? You may have actually gone, oh, good for her. You would not have said that person is going to be a world leader. And I think that's what we forget. Now, a lot of the things that she writes about small people can do big things because she has. And I think that's really important that as individuals, we can be incredibly powerful. Okay? Nobody would have ever picked on that poor girl as one of the great leaders, but people like Jane Attenborough actually get excited to meet her. Brilliant. Yes.
I really actually want to give us a lot of agency. I don't know whether you have but whether you worry about people doing destructive or negative things because of their feeling of agency. Whether it's possible.
So there is a huge issue with you, which is sometimes I would say that too much passion and too much commitment can go the other way. So, for example, I don't agree with the protesters in Great Britain who basically stuck themselves to motorways because they wanted to raise awareness. They stopped ambulances getting to hospital. You know, they disrupted. And for me, sometimes, and you know what? I understand it's coming from the right place. I understand it's coming from. But for me, I'd like to turn around to those people sometimes and say, but normal people aren't the issue. By disrupting normal people, you are making them hate your agenda. You need to win hearts and minds. So for me, agency sometimes can mean that people get so passionate and so myopic. And I think this is also true of my colleagues. They're all obsessed with climate change. Whereas I turn around and go, well, I'm worried about extreme poverty. I'm worried about sort of like global security. You know, it's no good if we have a brilliant sort of like climate, but we're all killing each other. Okay? Same with environmental degradation. It's no good if we keep climate reasonable, but we have no trees there. And so for me, it's about balancing and trying to actually balance all of the issues that we have, which are so complicated. But the really interesting thing, think how far we have come as a species in just 100 years. Your life expectancy is probably 95. Okay? Yeah, don't think that far. It's a long time in the future. Okay? 2 generations ago, you'd be lucky if you were going to hit 40, 45. Okay? So we have come a long way. Since the 1950s, we've double the world's population. Why? Because we've conquered every disease we have encountered. We have also worked out how to feed everybody. We just haven't worked out how to give them money to buy the food to keep them up to it. We have done all these amazing things. And also, we are starting to stabilize our own population because of women's education. We'll get to about 10 billion people and everything, but we just haven't worked out all this. Okay, so we are quite an amazing species. It's just, we have some really big blood sources. Yes.
No, sorry.
You said that last time. Keep going. We have and then you can buy me. Yes.
And of course, I also wonder. So I see that a lot of degree sentiment is related to environmentalism, right? Let's say being anti-nuclear, right, which was old school green movement, being anti-organic or anti-GMO, or being pro-organic, anti-GMO, which actually, if we look at it, a lot of this organic farming is actually SDM, well, suicide and is not always the most neutral way to go. So I wonder, how do you feel with this tension field within whoever identifies themselves as being green and environmental? Whereas if you look at the science, this does not always line up, right? So I wonder, because I have had this conversation with my Amsterdam friends, and I wonder, yeah, how does this go about that?
I think that's a question, because have you noticed that most environmentalism means are also left wing? It's like, however, I can give you 20, 100 policies on the right wing, which will do exactly the same job. I mean, it frustrates me. I mean, and in the book, one of the lovely lines is, the atmosphere does not care what patch you put. It doesn't. I don't care if you like it or it doesn't care how much you put it into that. But I think there are things we need to address. I also add to the problem, which is that the green movement is incredibly white middle class, particularly in this country. Okay? Again, we have to diversify. We have to include different voices. We have to make sure that Indigenous people are brought into the conversation in the right way. And so therefore, I would say it is a major issue. We need to actually diversify. And actually what we really want is everybody to be in the environment. We actually want the mother going to school, taking her kids, going, is that going to be the case in the environment? Yes, can I do that or sign up differently? So what we need to do is, instead of being a niche, it has to be standard. And that, I have to say, really is amazing. When I'm walking into board of $1 billion company, and you've got these people in incredible suits, really just incredible suits. Okay? Yes, I think we should reduce our carbon footprint by stuff like that. I think we should go carbon neutral by 2028. 2 years before Microsoft. I don't care if they're competitive. Let's do it. So I think it has to be going mainstream. And I actually think those old hippies or young hippies and all of those who have this, yes, sort that, okay. Let's go hardcore techno, we go basically social media organization, we have to actually every tool we have actually save the planet for the people that can't save it. So,
Right, can I ask one more question?
oh, go on then. I thought that was fantastic. Yeah, go on then. I can't do it.
I think it was maybe the early 2000s, but correct me if I'm wrong, when BP kind of set up the personal carbon footprint as a way to, I guess, extract from companies' own responsibility, somewhat like, of course, Coca-Cola and the plastic issues.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your own personal opinion is on that and how to address the balance between, I guess, focusing on maybe your personal carbon footprint, but also, getting the 100 largest corporations sort out the footprint that's obviously being passed on to a certain extent to us.
So I do not agree with personal carbon at all, because it is a denier, isn't it? And fossil fuels, they go, well, we only produce the petrol. You're the ones that choose the car to drive. It's like, I don't have an alternative. No, I want to get my kids to school, I have to use a car. You know, there isn't really alternatives. Okay? So I think that is a really nasty, vicious way that they've done it. I think also there's another thing that people don't realize, which is if you look at lifestyle carbon emissions, the richest 10% of people in the world, that's not in particular countries, that's just the richest altogether. That's the billionaires in China, the billionaires in Bolivia, the billionaires in America. No, you take that top 10%, they emit 50% of all the lifestyle carbon. To me, having a very real carbon when somebody's out there with 3 or 4 yachts going, oh yeah, actually, no social justice. And I think this is where there's this incredible terminology which everybody argues about. This is just transition. How do we transition? And the thing is, the point that I'm coming to more and more is that, and this may sound a little bit dramatic, we have to change everything. We have to change how we actually organize society, how we value people, how we actually support them from cradle to grave. We then have to think about how we actually produce energy for those people, how we produce the right goods and services, how we produce food, how we actually empower them to actually do things like come to university, to actually do things that are going to be positive, and at the same time we need to work out how to actually improve our environment. Meaning, the great thing is, we can still replant, we can still rewild the planet. The weird thing is, the planet is becoming a wilder place. Stick with it, okay? Yes, there's going to be 10 billion people. But guess what? Most of those people are now migrating to mega cities. But actually, the place is becoming wilder. So therefore, there are lots of areas where people don't live anymore, but we can be wild. Okay? Put nature back in there and actually preserve half of the planet, at the same time as we can also then take down the greenhouse gases. And that does take a bit of organization where, look, 2 countries actually next to each other can't even agree not to put tanks across the border. I mean, we do have some major issues as a global community. But yeah, unfortunately, yeah, and guess what? My generation has fucked it up for you. So I'm just going to leave it to you guys, okay? Because you're being educated at one of the great universities in the world, and look what happened to me. So therefore, it's all your fault. Okay, so now I'm finished.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all.
That's right.